Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bow here coming to you with another Canadian federal election update. And, well, there's really not much going on. We have verbal sparring with Trudeau and Poilievre. We have all sorts of random people going around making crazy theories, saying silly things, all this stuff. We have things happening in the economy, good, bad, seems like mostly bad, but there's a mix, somewhat. There's some policy decisions being made, some good, some bad, mostly bad it seems, but at the end of the day, you look back at this series, you look back at my model, and you look back at my updates, we really haven't changed the field we're at in ages. If you'll indulge, we don't need to see the full thing. We can just do the smaller version. Seat counts are not that important. Seat counts follow vote counts. That's how I will say it. So as you can see here, this is calibrated for June 25th, which is the day this video is airing. No, sorry, this is the day before the video is airing, but it doesn't matter. You can see here we're at 31.4 Lib, 36.3 Conservative, and everyone else doesn't really matter because it's the Conservatives and the Liberals vote shares which really dominate the number one seat totals. Yes, the NDP vote share matters in some regards. The Bloc vote share matters in some regards. But the NDP and Bloc vote share matters in the 5 to 10 seat range. Whereas Conservative and Liberal is really in the 50, like up to 50 seat range. Like 50 seats could swing, depending on the votes there. Now, not all of them can swing both ways. I don't think you're going to see a situation when the Liberals walk with 210 in 2025. Because it is looking like 2025 is probably going to be the next election. I don't think there's going to be one this fall. And again, I still see most credible institutions that I can see at least forecasting harsh economic times in the near future. Maybe not a recession, though I think it might be a recession. I'm not an economist, but it doesn't look like it's going to get better next year. And if the economy is not better next year, you're not going to see Trudeau call an election next year. And Singh won't vote Trudeau out. At this point, I think Trudeau could literally do anything. And Singh would not topple his government. If the failure to create an inquiry into the foreign interference stuff was not enough for Singh, I don't think anything will be. As long as Trudeau eventually does some kind of something on pharmacare. And it'll probably be as pussyfooted and half-assed as the first version of dental care was. And you probably won't see that get upgraded because by the time Singh would try to push Trudeau on a week to make a actually stronger version of the pharmacare plan, Trudeau will probably just call an election because it'll be sometime in either spring or fall 2025 when the election has to happen anyways. It'll just depend on what point in 2025 Trudeau thinks he is most likely to win. But who knows? So those are the two parties who matter. And we look back. Look all the way back in April. And we had about the same position. We go further back. We go to the beginning of March. At the beginning of March, the Liberals are at 33. And now they're, if we just go here and we freeze these top panes so we can keep seeing them. So we scroll back. We go back to the top of March here. Again, 4th of March. We can see that, let's just make it a bit cleaner. There we go. The Liberals have lost about 1.5 points. But where they've lost that points to, they've lost about a quarter of the Bloc, maybe half to the Greens, maybe 3/4 to the NDP. That really seems to be approximately what has happened. The Conservatives have slipped a little bit, but not much. And you kind of get the picture. The Liberals took some damage from the foreign interference, but at the same token, if you scroll even further back, we go all the way back to Jan 8 here, and the Liberals are only down 0.6 and the Conservatives are down 0.4. Bloc's up significantly, Greens are up, and that's just about it. And if you scroll all the way back to December 18th, here we finally have a point where September 18th. Misread my note. This was right after the leadership race, but really before we had many polls come out since then. And if you compare this point, this is the earliest update after Poilievre became leader. And this is him 9 months later. He's up a point. The Libs are down about 0.4. The NDP is down half. Greens are up a half. Bloc's up a half. And the People's Party's down about 0.8 and others down about 0.1. So far, in the entire year since Poilievre took over, in the entire year, we are looking at maybe a net movement of 1.4. Will that continue? Should we expect approximately 1.4 points of movement every 9 months? No, probably not, because that's not how this works. There's going to be ceilings, there's going to be floors. And if you look at some of these provinces, like Saskatchewan is probably near the ceiling for the Conservatives. It's only moved 0.3. Oh, shoot. That's not what I wanted to do. It's only moved 0.3 points since Poilievre's last 9 months of all the things that have happened. The Conservatives have rallied a bit more in Alberta, 2.2, but still not much. 0.9 in Manitoba, not much. The place where there seems to be the most movement is BC and Ontario. Or I'll rephrase this. Room for movement. Ontario is the Conservatives have gained about a point. The Libs have been flat. And in BC, the Conservatives gained about 1.4, the Liberals down 0.6, and the NDP 1.1. If you look at Atlantic Canada, here the NDP are up about a point, give or take, and the Conservatives are down about 0.6, and the Liberals down about half. Greens are up about 0.2. Overall, I'm not actually very convinced the Atlantic Canada numbers are relevant. But I really could go into that in its own thing. I don't know, a whole other video. But the general gist of Atlantic Canada, which I won't really touch on here for the rest of the video now, is the polls aren't very good in Atlantic Canada. And if you really want me to dive into that, let me know, and I can probably put that on the back list of videos I will eventually do. But I think it's pretty self-evident. It's a very diverse region when you compare places like West Nova or downtown Halifax or Bathurst and New Brunswick Southwest. There's lots of variance in this, and depending on the sampling, it can be wild. But we're not going to cover that too detailed because it's not the most relevant thing here. So why do I think Ontario and BC are the two places where there could be remaining movement? Well, to me, it seems pretty simple. 61-ish% in Saskatchewan, which is what we're at right now, which we're looking at, is near the ceiling the Conservatives can gain there. I think there is some room to grow. 65% doesn't seem entirely impossible to me. I'm just going to bring this up on the other screen here. Bear with me. I believe Scheer was around that, but I need to double check this. Yeah, Scheer was 64. So sound around 64, maybe 66 if all of the People's Party's brought in. Might be roughly the ceiling. And if you actually look into this, you look at this 1.9 and other 2.6 in People's Party, 60.8 here in Conservatives, that's roughly that. There's roughly maybe 66% of Saskatchewan votes right. And that's mostly the ceiling there. You can't really expect it to go much higher. I'll just put this over here so we can actually see the province. And at the same token, it's not very useful because the Conservatives are already winning every seat in Saskatchewan by a comfortable margin. The next one you got is Alberta. And yes, Scheer got 69% in Alberta. If you include others and People's Party, it's about 72%. O'Toole, once you include others and People's Party, I believe got closer to 64%. Let me double check this. About 64-ish. So once you include others here, you also have about 64 ceiling for the Conservatives in Alberta. So they could theoretically gain 8 points, and that would match Scheer's performance. I don't think that will happen because a lot of things have changed since 2019. First off, Alberta's grown quite a bit. There's more people there. Second, especially following this last Alberta election, I think there is some more energy among left-wingers in Alberta. They are more likely to turn out and vote. And at the same token, and maybe Poilievre could change this. It's not impossible. I think there's a lot lower morale on the side of Conservatives in Alberta federally. Repeated losses have sapped morale. And one of the reasons for Scheer's strong performance is he is a Saskatchewan MP. Not Alberta, sure, but Saskatchewan and Alberta are cousins. It's the same way that if you were to see a premier or major party leader from an Atlantic province, they're likely going to do better in all of the Atlantic provinces because they are brother provinces. They're siblings. Alberta and Saskatchewan are the same shtick. A local leader running in Saskatchewan is from Western Canada, from a similar area. They understand us better, is going to play better in Alberta than, yes, well, he's from Calgary, but he lives in Ottawa. It's going to play better than that. And it's going to drive out a lot of people who want to see a local boy be the prime minister. I don't think Poilievre can tap into that. But at the same token, we're really only leaving Poilievre's really only leaving one seat on the table. Even under Scheer's increased turnout, Edmonton Strathcona was still solid NDP. Calgary Northeast, is really the only riding he could gain. And he could still gain that riding fairly easily if the Liberals lose just like 1 point in Alberta. But him gaining much more ground seems unlikely. And the similar story repeats yet again in Manitoba. You look at it, yes, the combined right in Manitoba got approximately about 58-59%, depending on how you want to count it. And if you look back at Scheer's time, it was about the same, 58-59, depending on how you want to count it. Same ballpark. Sorry, 48-49, that range. 47-49 is roughly the range of the combined right in Manitoba. And right now, when you look at this, they're 47.3. They're a little low, but they're in the ballpark. They're in the ballpark. Let's say Poilievre can pull out another whole percent in Manitoba. Whole percent. It's not going to change anything. Winnipeg South Centre and Winnipeg South, the two closest ridings in Winnipeg, are still like 8-point leads for the Liberals. So if they lose a point province-wide, it doesn't change much. And sure, you could argue with the current Liberal vote share in Manitoba and their current performance in rural Manitoba, they actually will lose more votes proportionally in Winnipeg by losing a point in Manitoba than they will in the rurals. And yes, I would agree with you with that assertion, but you're not going to see it really happen here, other than if the Liberals collapse. People will point to 2011 and be like, oh, look, Harper did so good. He won all these ridings in Winnipeg. He got 11 seats in Manitoba. Not completely missing the point that was an entire fluke. Harper didn't get 11 seats in Manitoba because Harper was good at campaigning, because Harper was a gifted statesman, because Harper was the best thing since sliced bread. He won 11 seats in Manitoba because Ignatieff flopped harder than any politician the Liberals have ever ran. The only politician in Canadian history I would say has flopped harder was Kim Campbell. Though, to her defense, I don't think she's entirely to blame. Brian Mulroney really gave her a bad bed to stand on. So if all the prairies are out, and the territories are out because the territories are just kind of a wild beast. They're so dominated by personal effects that if I got all three of these wrong, I wouldn't be surprised. Personal candidate effects, that is, because they're all small areas and usually dominated by one town. So one strong performance can just wildly change things. So what do we got? Well, Quebec? No. Blanchet's doing strong. He's had great approvals in Quebec. Minorities are generally good for Quebec because it gives the Bloc more power. And a reduced minority like this, which every forecast so far is saying that whoever's going to win is going to be in a more precarious situation than Trudeau is right now in the legislature, is better for the Bloc. This parliament, if we had 139 to 141, the Bloc holds balance of power. That means they can do whatever. The Bloc effectively will run this government. If this election result occurred, Blanchet is effectively prime minister. Because he can do whatever he wants. Because any liberal-ish, like lefty things the Bloc wants to do, the Liberals will probably vote with them. Any righty things that the Bloc wants to do, the Conservatives will probably vote for them. So any legislation that Blanchet wants to pass can pass in this parliament. That is not true for Poilievre. That is not true for Trudeau. Now, sure, it's likely that Poilievre or Trudeau will occupy the executive offices, and the Prime Minister of Canada is incredibly powerful. One of the most powerful single persons in the world when you talk about control over the country they're governing. But legislatively, Blanchet will control this parliament. So there's no reason to really expect the Bloc vote to shift monumentally. Maybe with some really strong local candidates, In a really strong performance, Poilievre can maybe pick up 2-3 seats in Quebec. Not much. Not much at all. You look at Atlantic Canada, which I'm not going to touch on in too great detail, but the general gist is there is lots of room to grow. There's definitely seats that can be picked up here. But we don't really know what's going on because the polls are not very good in Atlantic Canada. And I don't mean there's not enough polls. I mean the quality is bad. And the quality's always been bad. And if you really want to talk about this, I can do another whole video. Comment below. But there's really never been good polling in Atlantic Canada. It's really chaotic. Even the same pollster. Every single pollster, by the way, will have wild shifts poll over poll. One of the reasons for this is small sampling. But again, I'm getting too deep into this. If you want that, let me know and I can do a video on it. So then we've wiped out 3 of the 5 regions of Canada that really are in play for considerations. We're left with BC and Ontario. We bring this back up and we look at this. In Ontario, the Conservatives are doing better than they have since, what would this be, 2011, I think? I believe it's 2011. Let me double check this. Yeah, it's since 2011. They're beating out 2015 by 2.5 points for those curious. So there is definitely room to grow in Ontario. You saw Harper get strong numbers in 2008 in Ontario. That's the important thing. 2008. He got 39. I think that is the upper bound target to what the Conservatives should expect. 2011 numbers, once again, you shouldn't expect them because the big thing with 2011, which makes it so anomalous, so not useful for comparing performance to, what could happen, what could be, is, again, Ignatieff. 2008, though, the Liberals, they didn't do great. Don't get me wrong, they did pretty poorly in 2008. But they didn't do awful. We're still talking 26% range, which is probably too low for Trudeau. I think that's way below Trudeau's floor. But it's closer than 2011's Ignatieff result, which, if I bring that up here on my other screen, 2 screens is great, by the way. Ignatieff got 19%. That's just not happening. I think 29% might be Trudeau's floor. And when I say floor, I genuinely and truly mean floor. I don't think he could possibly go below 29% nationally. And consequently, he probably really can't go much below 34 in Ontario. Probably not. And again, if you look back at 2008, 34 was where Dion was. And in 2011, one of the worst performances in the history of the Liberal Party, it was 25. So their worst possible performance with a very strong NDP performance was 25. And the Conservatives only got 44. Now, we're not going to duplicate that. It's impossible. Trudeau's too strong of a candidate. For all of his negatives, the core group of voters like him. Or his voters, I should say. And there is room to grow in Ontario, both seats and votes. Maybe about 1.5 points, if we want to be generous. But that's still room to grow. If you dive in on some of these seats, like Just the ones within margin of error right now in Ontario between the Liberals and the Conservatives. There's already 6 of those. Sudbury, London West, St. Catharines, and then 3 in York. I can't think of the names. I think this one's Newmarket Aurora. There's a lot of seats. Can't memorize all of them. That's already 6 seats right there. You put Timmins, James Bay, because that's also within margin of error. If the Conservatives go up a little bit, they can win that. Well, that's 7 seats. That's now putting the Conservatives around 48, and they're a firmly strong position. And we're not talking large amounts of vote gain. Just 1, maybe 2%. Now, the calculus also works backwards here. Just 1, 2%. And you could see things like Cambridge, Niagara West, this seat that I can't think of the name of, Canada Carleton. It's already 4 that they could lose with only 1, maybe 2 point change. We go to BC, we have really the same picture here. You go to something like 2008, which I think, again, is really the best case for Poilievre right now. I think a 2008 style performance, with the sole caveat that he's going to do better in Saskatchewan than Harper did in 2008 because of demographic trends. And hopefully he'll do better in Atlantic Canada, but that's not certain. Harper got 44% in BC in 2008. 44%. Whew. We go back to here. Right now, the Conservatives are at 37.1. Even if we add in the People's Party and we add in the bracket of quote-unquote other, because there was no other meaningfully in 2008 in BC, and we roll that in, and we get 40.4. So the Conservatives could still gain 4 points, let's say. And so right here, let's spitball. +4 is the ceiling for the Conservatives in BC. Now, if that does happen, it's probably going to be equal damage to the Liberals and the NDP. I don't really see the Liberal base or the NDP base shifting that substantially versus each other. So let's say they each lose 2 and the Conservatives gain 4. What are we looking at? Well, both Coquitlam's, Bulkina, Skunk Valley, pronunciations, I know. Delta, sure. Vancouver, Granville, potentially. These 2 on Vancouver Island, I can't think of the names of. Yeah, those could all happen. Let's do a ballpark. That's a rough estimate here, right? We could see maybe 7 seats. If the Conservatives do their best case scenario in BC, about 41-ish. Not bad. You do about 41-ish. You got a similar performance in Ontario, 41-ish. Not only do you win the 7 that are within margin of error right now, you also probably win Pickering, Uxbridge. This one here, I can't think of the name of. That one. Oakville area. There's a lot of ridings. I can't think of them all right here. But you get the picture, I hope. Ontario and BC have room to grow for Poilievre. They also have room to grow for Trudeau. If we look here, 26.6 is a subpar performance for Trudeau. It's only 0.4 less than 2019, or 2021, I should say. But it's still a subpar performance. And if we consider that in the next election, if it is really like this forecast is showing, we will probably see more strategic voting for the Liberals. The NDP numbers might be even lower than they are currently forecast because of this. You could see the Liberals getting 28, 29 in BC with a strong campaign and a strong organization. Now, frankly, it's kind of hard to picture what that really means, because the Liberals have never really performed that strong in BC up until the last little bit, the last decade or so. So if they start performing around 30%, which is possible with strategic voting and some strong campaign, it's hard to picture what this means. At the bottom end of the stick, we can say right now on this graphic with these seats, let's say 4 as the bottom end of it, but who knows? Maybe they'll have breakthroughs in Vancouver Island, Victoria maybe. Hard to say. Maybe they're that constrained that they can really only go about 4, maybe 5 seats. Depends on their vote share. If you watched my Manitoba video recently, we kind of get this same picture nationally that right now is affecting Manitoba provincially, where the Liberals have their vote share to seat conversion curve is more efficient at the bands that elections in Canada are being fought over. Now, their vote efficiency will not always universally be true. In practice, the Liberals have a lower floor than the Conservatives, and they have a lower ceiling than the Conservatives. Why might that be? Well, look at the seats where the Liberals do well in right now. They've almost maxed out Toronto. They're close to maxing out the GVA. They've basically maxed out Montreal. And of small city Ontario, they're doing really well. Yes, they can gain more seats, and they can gain a majority. I'm not discounting this. A Liberal majority is something that can easily happen. We saw it in 2015. We could see it again one day. But the gist of this is the Conservative ceiling is actually significantly higher than the Liberal ceiling in seat gain. Their top end of the Conservative vote share to seat conversion curve is healthier, because at the top end of that curve, rural Quebec folds Conservative. That's how you see Brian Mulroney's, Diefenbaker's. That's what happens on the top end of the Conservative curve. All of rural Quebec folds Conservative, giving them easily 200 seats. But elections in Canada in the 21st century are not fought in the 40-50% range of popular vote. We are clawing tooth and nail in the mid 30%. And in the mid 30% range, the Liberal vote efficiency is overwhelmingly more powerful because, for the most part, cities vote homogenously. Why is that? Well, the population of a city is very intramobile. People who live in apartments are not committed to one particular area, so they will move around a lot. And the bigger the city, the more rentals there are. Rentees are not very fixed to a geographic area. This makes the character of a city more homogeneous because people move their permanent residence from one end of a city to another, to another, to another over the course of decades. People from large areas go to similar schools. They go to similar entertainment centers. Schools in cities tend to be larger as a result because there's more people there and there's efficiencies of scale. the most part, cities are very homogenous. So, well, in the early 30s in vote percent range, the Liberals basically win all of the cities. And it's really only when you start seeing 2008 or 2011 vote share ratios, when you're looking at conservative plus 11 range, where you start seeing gains made in cities for the conservatives. Now, if we move the vote share band, and instead of talking about mid-30s, we're talking about mid-40s, this calculus changes, and the suburbs suddenly, shockingly, surprisingly, become competitive again. Places that are monotonically liberal in the 30% metric are almost monotonically conservative in the 40% metric. Here's what I mean. This is an election fought in the 40% metric. I won't really go into how I got this scenario. If you really care, you can let me know in the comments below. But as we can see, and this is based on real data, by the way, if we are looking in the 40% metric, the conservative vote share is more efficient, because lots of these suburbs of Toronto, under the 30% metric, are competitive. The Liberals can win them. They're very close. We pull into the 40%. This is pretty safe. This is about as safe as any urban ridings can be. That's really the picture we're looking at here. And this is the thing you need to understand when people talk about vote efficiency. Vote efficiency isn't monotonic. It's about where you are in the curve. And right now, the curve benefits Trudeau. But it doesn't take many vote losses before that happens. Some of the polls have had 37 Conservatives, 29 Liberals. It's an 8-point difference. When you start talking about 8-point differences, we are creeping into the range where the vote efficiency paradigm will shift. Not there yet. But that kind of margin, that kind of range, is where the math changes. But with that, if you liked the video, by all means like, share, subscribe, comment below if you think this was a good overview, synopsis of what's going on. If this was too complicated, if this was too simple, I should have been more complicated, let me know. If you want to hear any particular little sub nuggets that I sometimes mention in videos, let me know, and they will be on the list. I have lots of things on the list. One day it'll happen. And otherwise, do all the YouTube things. Like the button. But otherwise, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next week with something different.